Hey, welcome to part 1 of this series. In this one, we're going to kind of tackle the simple approach to doing this cool growth effect, which is pretty common, and I think it's a super useful skill to have. We're going to dive straight into it. So I am starting off with the ball scene that we did in the last month, or maybe 2 months ago now, where we created a procedural tennis ball, and then we kind of lit the scene just very basically with the ball. So you can find that file on my Patreon if you want to kind of jump in from that point. So what we want to do is, let's just turn off that and all these lights we can just turn off for right now. And with this Luke Van script, they kind of turn different colors, which is pretty neat. We can jump into our camera. For right now, it doesn't really matter. And let's dive into this hit working. So what we have here is we have the animation of the ball, and we cleaned it up, we did some hair here, and then we rendered the ball. I'm going to remove this animation, and we are actually going to do some animation, but we're going to do it over here somewhere, and we will end up rendering this ball somewhere else. So let's do this. Let's just set these to all be 0. So our ball's over there, and what we'll do is just kind of move our scene so that it's something like this. And let's also make our camera vertical. So 1080 by 1920. And we can zoom in. So something like that. And for this animation, I did something super simple. I just pulled it off the screen, I keyframed that, and then I think I went 50 frames. And then I pulled it somewhere where I can see it, like that. Keyframe, and then I also just did some rotation, so as it comes up here it rotates, so we get this. And then what I did was I just kind of changed the easing a little bit. So if I hit shift or spacebar H, it kind of frames them all up, and I can probably just use one of these presets. Easy. Let's try the hardcore one, easy out 2. Okay, so I needed to get in here a lot quicker. So that's not going to work for me. So what I can do though is just turn these back into Bezier curves. And let's just do these one at a time. It's a bit easier trying to grab handles when this is one of them. I'm not sure why there's a keyframe there. So I basically want something like this that shoots out. And again, this one. And then with the Y, this one's probably the most important. It needs to really shoot out. Alright, so let's see what that looks like. Maybe what we can do is just move this in a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is at the end here, I can just add some extra rotation so it keeps going. So let's say that, and then when we check these out now, get some wonkiness here. So let's just fix that. I just wanted that as it hits that point, it doesn't get too weird. Okay, so I think that for the animation that looks pretty good. Boom, and then this needs to go down just a smidge. There we go. So now it comes up, and then bam, the growth will happen. Okay, so that looks cool. What we're going to do is just disable that for a second and get out of our camera here just so we can see it. The whole effect is going to be driven by a Mops spread falloff. And what we can do here is just pick a random point. And if we have a look, we can preview it, and then we can see that we get this growth effect, and we can add some noise. I want the noise to be quite subtle. Yeah, something like that looks pretty good. So now we can keyframe this. So I'm just going to keyframe it on frame 1, and then maybe frame 50 or 75. We'll just get it so that it goes to the back. There we go. All right, and for this one, I also wanted a nice kind of shockwave power punch. So it kind of shoots out like boom. Or maybe that's too much. Oh. What is going on now? Did I just break it? No, okay. So maybe something like that's better. Okay, yeah, that looks cool. And what we need to do now is we need to actually see where this is going to be in relation to our ball actually coming in. So we want it to, as it slows down here, so at frame 27, so we can just slide this forward. And maybe this should be a little bit faster. So it goes up and then boom. Okay, so as you can see, the start point is in the wrong place, but because of the way that this is set up, I can just go here now and pick the point that I want. So now it's in the right place. But you'll see that this is actually starting to get quite sluggish. And if I go here, I can right click and say draw time. And if I hit play, you can see that I'm only getting max 10 frames per second, which on a simple thing like this, if I hit this, you can see that I'm getting 25 frames. So this is getting quite slow. So what I want to do is I want to time shift this to frame 1. And then I get my Mops Falloff. And then what I want to do is just do an attribute copy and put this back. So I still have my Mops Falloff, and if I hit play now, you can see I have 25 frames per second, and I still have my Mops Falloff. And that's just because this is trying to cook every frame, which I don't need it to do that. And it's one of those things in production, if you want to call it that. It really helps to kind of get these little tricks where you can make things faster if you need them to be faster. So I'm going to slow this down even more. I want it to kind of shoot in, but not so much that it is like a jump. So here it's doing like 1, 2, 3, and then it's fully covered. But so we'll leave that for now, but maybe we'll have to adjust it later. Let's just turn off this visualizer. So for a visualizer, let's just create ourselves a line. We'll put it on the Z axis, and we can do a copy to points. And what we need to do is just make sure we have some normals on points. We can make this shorter. All right, so we have got lines, and to see this more easily, we can sweep this with a round tube. And something looks very weird here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we have our round tube. And maybe we just add some end caps. Okay, so we have this. And what we want to do is we want to scale these with the Mops Falloff. So we can do an attribute wrangle. There's lots of ways you can do this, but we'll do it with an attribute wrangle. Remap mops to pscale. You can use an attribute remap, but the way that attribute remap uses its channel ramp does some weird things. So for this, I like to use a wrangle. So we're going to say pscale equals, we want to take mops, but we also want to remap it. So what we can do is just create a channel ramp, and we'll just say this is the pscale ramp. And what we want to use is we want to use Mops Falloff. This is already 0 to 1, so we don't have to worry about that. We can hit enter, and now we have our ramp. And like that, you can see that we have this growth effect. And something looks weird here. Okay, that looks a little cooler. Yeah, so we have our growth effect. And maybe what we want to do here is just scatter some points so it looks a little better. Okay, so we have this growth, and what I want to do with this is on this leading edge, I want to kind of create a nice, I don't know, bump or ripple, if you will. And we can do that with this channel ramp over here. So this is going to be set to 1, but this one, I want to set this one to be a much higher value. Let's say 2.2. Let's just visualize these. All right. And then let's just turn all these to B-spline. B-spline, and then let's push this up. All right, so now we get like this leading edge that's inflated, if you want to call it that. And that looks kind of cool. Let's just check it in our camera. And so maybe this is a little bit fast, so we can just pull this out a little bit so that it comes in, and this beginning bit is too fast, so it's because the main action is this section here, so we can kind of pull it in so that it does a little mini shootout, and then it should slow down. There we go. Okay, so that's starting to feel a little bit better. Okay, so now we have this is kind of just for visualization. Now we have this, we can hit a null here, and we're going to say that this is our out base mesh, and let's just make that gray. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just copy that node, and we now need to get some sort of growth or something happening here, and make sure that our ball is being pulled into the right one. So what I'm going to use OD tools, and I'm going to use some Megascans. You can use any kind of plants or anything for this. The reason that I like Megascans and I like OD tools for this is it makes the whole process really, really easy. So let's just start with, I don't know, this red flower, Amaryllis. It'll come in, and then it'll ask me what renderer. I'll say redshift, and now we have this cool viewport of these flowers. Beautiful. And if we go inside here, OD Tools does a whole bunch of setup for us. It merges them, it adds variants, it adds material, and then it scales it so that it's the right scale or scene for the scene for us. What I need to do is I need to change this so that it's on the Z scale, or the Z axis, I should say. So it's pointing that way. And then I copied that node. I don't want to paste it. I want to Control Shift V, and then it'll object merge it with OD Tools. And now I have this. So what I want to do is I want to do a copy to points, and I want to copy these onto some points, but I don't have points, so we can scatter some points. And I'm going to use a density attribute, and this way you can kind of just get like some clumping. So I'll use a noise just to set up a float value, and we want this to be density. And if we take a look at that, I can just crunch some of these values and maybe make it a bit smaller still. And now if we look at it, we see we get these kind of clumps of points, whereas without this, it's just kind of a uniform pattern. And now we get this really nice clumping. And I find that this just makes it feel a little bit more organic, because flowers generally happen in little clumps, not just randomly. I don't know, maybe not. Then we can use an attribute from pieces, and this will just let us use a variant attribute. And with OD Tools, it creates the variant attribute for us. So here we have 7 different variants of this plant. So we can just pipe these in, and when we pipe in the copy to points, we just need to check this variant box. And we don't want to cycle, we want to use random or patches. I think random is fine for this one. And obviously these are now too big. So if we look at our camera, these are huge. So let's use an attribute randomize. And let's set this to pscale. And we can do something like 0.25, and then we can just scale this down until they start to feel right. It's probably still too big. Alright, that's looking better. I don't know why these ones don't have, they're all green. That's interesting. What I'm going to do in this material is just turn off the OGL textures. I don't actually like them in the viewport most of the time, but that looks pretty cool. So we have this, and you can see that these are shaking like crazy, and that's because we have this point here, and maybe it's our points. You can see how they are changing as this thing's moving. These are changing, and so what we're going to do is a very cool trick that is very good to do when you're using points like this. Is we're going to do a time shift, and let's just change this to frame 1. We are going to do our scatter, and this is disappearing down here. We'll do our scatter, and then we can use an attribute interpolate, and what we need to do is just turn on these 2 attributes. That's just what this requires. And now if we have a look, where's it gone here? The points are static. Well, they're moving, but the point themselves are static. Something else I'm going to do is just drop down and enumerate and just give these an ID. It's probably not necessary, but as I said, like, these are the types of things that are super useful just to do when you're building a setup, especially if we're going to copy multiple. Then we can just copy this little setup here, and we don't have to do it multiple times or come in later and fill it out. So if you have, you know, 8 or 9 different containers and you have to go in and do this setup, it gets a little bit annoying. But if you do it all in the beginning because maybe you need it, then it's worthwhile doing it like this. So we have our variant, our pscale, and the last thing I want to do is just drop down a Mops randomize. And I always like to just add a little bit of random rotation, not to everything, otherwise, you know, they go a little bit crazy. But if we go in here, I know it's going to be the Z's one, so let's just turn off these other ones. So what we have here is, if you turn this, you can see it's just rotating around this axis. And we don't even need that much, maybe 120, 120. And then I usually just do a very small amount of these. Just give a little bit of randomness so that nothing is the same. I think for the density of this one, I'm going to level that out a little bit more so that it's a little bit more uniform, but there's still some gaps. I'm going to decrease the pscale. All right, so let's say that this is what I'm happy with. You'll notice that this isn't growing on, and we want it to grow on. And so what we can do here is we can use an attribute adjust float. And we can just turn off this, and we can multiply, pretty much do what we just did, but multiply our incoming value by some value. So you'll see here now, as this comes up, these grow on. And so now we can control that with these numbers here. So let's try something like this. Okay, these feel a little bit big, very big. I think what I'm going to do is just come into my scene, and I previously scaled it really small. I'm just going to scale it way up, and then we can zoom out with our camera. And I think our original tennis ball was too small. And I found in my tests that it made sense to make it bigger. So now we'll keep it bigger, and we have something like that. And now I feel like I need a few more of these. So let's just jump it up to 3000. And now we have some cool flowers that, as this comes on, it grows. So these at the moment are not packed, but I am going to pack them. It makes it a lot faster, as you can see in the playback. So what we need to do here is just turn on instance top level pack primitives. Let's turn our background on, and we can move back our camera a little bit, and let's hit render. Okay, so this is the lighting setup and everything we had from before, and obviously it looks pretty bad. The first thing we can do is just turn off our Depth of field, we don't need that anymore. Let's jump into our background and let's give ourselves something very neutral. Turn off this ramp and just gives us a nice gray like that. And our background light, let's split left and right. So let's just turn this up. We need to turn our, or move our background down so that we don't see the bottom. And then it's too small, so let's just make it bigger and move it down. Okay, so that's looking good. Let's grab this background light and just move it to the background. All right, so for the background, that's fine for right now. Let's sort out our main light. So let's turn off our background light, turn off our dome light, and see what our main light is doing. Let's make it a little bit bigger. We can just move it forward a bit. And let's turn on our ball underneath. Yeah, so that obviously changes the look a lot. So that's good that we did that. Tennis ball, we can just make it a little less bright and saturated. I think I need to just turn down this bend amount because we're not actually using the infinity. I want some bounce on the bottom without seeing the floor. Okay, let's move our background out again. Alright, so we can turn that off, and then I think now this main light's hitting the floor, which is okay. We can probably I think there's a few ways we can deal with that. We can either just use it, or we can also just remove it, move the background from here. So inside here we can say everything but the OBJ/BG, and now it doesn't affect that. So now we kind of keep things separated. And then finally, let's bring in our light dome. And this is just kind of giving us some nice full lights on the side here. Okay, so that obviously is not looking great, but it's a good start, and we can play a little bit with these flowers, the textures. If we dive in here, I won't use displacement or bump map. I'm going to mainly just play with these two here, and what I'm going to do is just use a color correct. No, a color correct, and just pipe this and then duplicate it and pipe this into the translucency color, and I find that this gives me more control over the translucency itself. And then here I can also just push the colors if I need to. It's maybe a little bit bright. All right, so that's starting to feel pretty cool. The background has gone a bit funky on me. Okay, and then I do need some sort of fill light here, so Let's just duplicate this and we'll call this full. Just pull this around. That's where I need it, but obviously now it's too strong, maybe 10. That's still pretty strong. And something that we have to just keep in mind is that when we fill this, we won't see the shiny tennis ball underneath, which we do right now. So let's get something a little bit more filling. That's going to kind of be our ground cover. So let's just say we're happy with this. Let's turn this off and turn that off. We'll go back to this and pick something. I think I'm going to try some grass clumps. The cool thing with the way that OD Tools is set up is it's really easy to get stuff going. I'm going to just copy these nodes and move this over here and paste this. And that's what I mean by easy to set up. I can just copy and paste stuff and now everything works. I just need to make sure that I rotate this 90. If I go into the main camera, now we have this grass, and it's always good just to double check that it is right. Yeah, it is. Okay, and obviously now I need a lot more of this. And for the grass, this is like my main cover. I'm not going to use this density attribute because I want it to fill the whole shape. And again, I'm going to just turn off these textures. Can maybe increase the size of these so that they feel like big fluffy fat grass. And I know, because this is what I always do, I'm just going to delete some of these things. I don't want specular. And just as we had just done, I'm going to use a color correct and just pipe this into translucency color. Let's turn on some translucency and then just push this up a little bit. And I'm going to do that. So I'm going to do that before I hit render. Then I get nice and pleasantly surprised when it looks so beautiful without doing anything. So let's hit render again. So now we have this cool furry fuzzy grass. Now we can see that we definitely need to push our lighting. So let's just increase this one. And I think this light needs to just come down a bit. Yeah, that's better. Now we can turn down the intensity. Maybe keep up the intensity and turn down this. Our full light can be higher. So we just break in the shadow and it can wrap around the front a little bit. And you'll notice with these grass clumps that there isn't a lot of like high ones and small ones. They're kind of all the same. And instead of trying to combat that in this node, what I ended up doing was just grabbing either tall grass or lemongrass. Like there's a whole bunch of these different ones. I can't even remember which one I ended up using. Maybe wheatgrass. So many nice grasses out there. Let's try wheatgrass. So as always, I'm going to just grab this stuff, copy it, and then just make sure that I turn on instant sub-level pack primitives before getting too far. Paste. And for this one, I am going to use density because what I want to do is I want to make sure that these grass sections are only in a very specific grouping, and maybe there's not even that many of them, maybe only 10,000. And I want these to be quite big. These need to be rotated 90 degrees so that they're facing the right direction. Yeah, so that looks good. Let's give it a little bit more clumping even. Come on. By just squeezing these values. Okay, so we have some clumping. Maybe it's too much now. So you get something like that. And let's just quickly deal with our material here. Okay, so with these two together, it looks like this. So that's starting to look pretty cool. Obviously, these wheat ones are maybe too big now. So let's make these 1 and 3, refresh. Yeah, so you get these kind of little tufts, and maybe this is still too intense. And the reason it disappears from the viewport is because of the packed primitives. Houdini struggles with that, and so does Redshift. Okay, so now you get these kind of like random puffs, and they different grass, and it looks pretty good. We can add in our amaryllis and hit re-render. And this is still pretty fast. It's still running near real time, so it's still a lot of fun to play with this stuff, and you can add a lot of these and it doesn't really matter. Let's put the red back in, and maybe I actually want more saturation because it looks like some of these are fading out a little bit. Maybe it's my translucency. Let's try and get these nice and red. All right, so that garden's starting to look cool. The wheatgrass, you can see that they a slightly different shade, and I want them to integrate a little bit more, so we can just push this values and maybe pull down the saturation. All right. And I actually think that's part of the amaryllis, not the grass. And that's a bit harder to treat because the textures are all one here. Like you don't have a leaf versus thing. So the more we saturate one thing, so if you can see that it changes both the flower and the petals, or the flower petals, as well as the leaves. But I think overall this is looking quite cool. And then the only other thing that I thought was quite a cool little thing to do is, because the tennis ball is usually white over there, I grabbed some of the white flowers, which are called white. So they should be in the, here we go, white everlastings. All right, so let's just pause this. And as always, let's just grab one of these preset things that we've already made, and we can just pop this into here. And what I want to do here is I can do a split node, or blast node, I guess. I don't need the other one, but I tend to use split nodes a lot these days. And I just want to split this loops section, which we created when we procedurally created the ball. So now we just have, oh, okay, there actually are points there. It's just that there's a color. So let's just delete this color. Okay. All right. So now we have a whole bunch of points, and we can, let's make sure that we rotate these. And we've done this several times before. Let's turn these off. Let's dive in here, delete the ones we're not going to use. And we can use our color correct. And this may not be the most physically accurate way of making flowers, but I prefer it to using the textures they give you. They don't seem that great. And this way I can have a little bit more control. So if we turn everything else off and we hit render again, oh, I forgot to instance top level pack primitives. All right, so now that we are back, this actually looks pretty funny without anything else, but let's add all the other elements to it. And that looks like a tennis ball, but a little bit of a cool florally one. So this doesn't look bad, but I would like to kind of change a few things about this. It looks a little bit dull for my personal taste. And so one of the things I can do is just add a little bit of color into my main light. And this kind of acts like a sunlight, so it just brings a little bit of warmth to it. And maybe in this full light we can cool it a little bit. It just kind of mimics a little bit of realism, maybe. I don't know. But it does look cool. And then maybe this main light still needs to be brighter. And there's so many ways we can do it. Maybe let's try increase the scale. And just... Alright, that looks cool. And these grass clumps, let's just push some of the translucency of that. So without translucency, you can see how dark and dreary it is. And now it kind of makes it a lot brighter, and it takes the light in a lot more. So there is a bit of a balancing act between the lights and the translucency. So you kind of have to play with that and just balance it. I want to move this light up a little bit more. And maybe we just bring it forward a bit with a slight rotation. So we're getting light over here. This is kind of giving us a nice little rim light over there. Maybe we don't need so many grass clumps, or maybe we can just make them a little bit smaller. Let's just try this and see. What I don't want is I don't want any gaps, because gaps then look weird. But I also don't want it to be too overgrown that there's like no like definition in what we can see. So that looks better. And as always, you can kind of sit and play with different things. Maybe we make these amaryllis a little bit bigger just so that they can have a little bit more of a prominent, that's kind of like our hero in this whole thing. And this is too big. I think our wheatgrass can be a little bit smaller. And now it's just a matter of playing and fine tuning what you think looks cool. But as I said, what's cool with this is it's now growing on with our animation. So if we go back a few frames, we render, let's go back a few more frames, you can see that this is growing on. And what would be interesting, which I didn't do, is if we didn't even have a ball, maybe this is what I should have done. And now you have this kind of tennis ball growing on out of nothing. I quite like that. So I might actually render this and use this as a part of the promo that I haven't yet done, because this is very cool. I like the way that this is growing out of thin air rather than the ball being there. But yeah, there's many ways that you can do this. And you can obviously go in and change things. So we can also go in here to the remap this, and we can change this to be 4 and 4. And you can see how these ones on the front end are so much bigger now. So much bigger now. And that's a kind of a cool effect if you want it to be that big. I just love the fact that you have so much control over this. Maybe let's go for something in between. Let's render that. Yeah, so I think that looks pretty neat. So I think for part 1, I'm going to wrap it up there and just leave it at that. In part 2, we're going to kind of do some more technical things. We're going to add a whole bunch of little small details to the scene that I think make a big difference, but as a kind of a simple version of getting into this, this is a super fun technique. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you in part 2.